Hey, thanks for watching this Clear Creek Forum. The purpose of our forums is to grow in our understanding and application on various topics by bringing in experts to speak. For this forum, we brought in Chap Clark, the author of Sticky Faith, to talk about parenting. After watching this, if you want to get more connected, we want to encourage you to go to clearcreek.org to find your next step. Thanks for watching.
Good evening. Welcome to Clear Creek Community Church and our very first forum. So if you're still in the back of the room, find a seat. And I want to introduce myself. My name is Lance Lawson. I lead our Church on Wednesday campus, which meets right here in this room on Wednesday nights. And I also get to think about the way we reach marriages and families here at Clear Creek Community Church. And so that's part of why I'm up here tonight. And I just want to introduce the idea of forums to you because this is new for us, but it's something that we hope to do more of in the future. And so here's what you can expect tonight to look like. We have brought in an expert. His name is Chap Clark, and he's got a lot to say about parenting, way more than he can say in the time that we have tonight, but you're going to get the chance to ask him some questions. And if you use this website, slido.com, and you use the code PARENT, that will allow you to ask any question you want. And later in the evening, we will go through those questions and get Chap to answer as many of them as he can with the time that we've got. So slido.com, use code PARENT. If you're slow, you might want to snap a picture of that because you can log in anytime for the rest of the night. Okay, our aim tonight is not that you just walk away with more information, but that you also get connected, that you are inspired to be connected in community if you're not already doing so, but that you can also get connected to some of our age-graded ministries. So in the lobby, our children's ministry and our student ministry ministries, I said ministry a lot there, they have set tables up and they have representatives from several campuses there. They can meet you and answer any questions you have, but they also have recommended resources for the age of your children or grandchildren that they can recommend for you guys. All right, and last thing I want to do is remind you that clearcreekresources.org is a great place for you to continue the conversation with articles, and that's where we post sermons and videos, but that's also where tonight's forum will live, at clearcreekresources.com. We're going to record this. It'll be available online, and we also will have a podcast that will be posted with Chap. And we're going to take that book you got, Sticky Faith. If you didn't get a book on your way in, they're in the lobby. You should grab one. And for the next few weeks after this, we're going to read through that together. I invite anybody to do that. And I'll write a few series of articles that will be posted on Clear Creek Resources that allow us to interact with what's in that book and how it might fit in our context. Okay, so now I want to introduce you to Chap Clark. And his bio is like 4 pages, but I'm going to hit some high points. Chap is currently suffering in the name of Jesus as the lead pastor at St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church in Newport Beach, California. It's got to be a tough place to do ministry there. He served at Fuller Theological Seminary for a long time. He's going to tell you more about that. He's worked with Youth Worker Journal. He's president currently of Parentine, a nonprofit organization helping adults understand and respond to the developmental and spiritual needs of adolescents, as well as having authored or co-authored 25 books, including Sticky Faith, which you got a copy of tonight, Hurt 2.0, Deep Justice in a Broken World, and others. Long ago, he was also on Young Life staff for about 15 years. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Chap Clark. Thanks, Chap.
Hi, everybody. It is such a great joy to be here. Thank you for socially distancing. We call this our 8 o'clock service. So I just want to let you know, pre-COVID. And I'm from Orange County, California. And what's really interesting is what's so great is finally we have normal news on. Obviously, the vaccines is the number one thing, but the major news story is what's going to happen to Deshaun Watson. So I'm feeling like this is a fun new season for us. Maybe that's not fun for you, but we really care about Deshaun there in Southern California. And the Lakers have lost 2 in a row. Just want to tell you that. The only thing you hear from that bio is that I'm old. Okay, I've had a lot of work done. I just want to admit, I haven't really, just kidding. And I got 3 kids of my own. I got a 39-year-old who's named after a great American. I think Chappie's 39. And 39, and then Rob is 36, and Katie's 32. I got 3 granddaughters that has made everything I'm going to say to you like this stuff really matters, okay? Because those 3 granddaughters are growing up in a world where they might not necessarily be honored by every person they meet. And so how do we build into them? That's what we're going to talk about. Is this thing on yet for us to get? All right, so as we go, you got the book Sticky Faith, and the reality is that you have the book Sticky Faith. Kara Powell and I wrote that. She's the head of the Fuller Youth Institute at Fuller Seminary. You really don't need me to fill it up with fluff because it's all there. So once you read the book, like any book, it'll change your life, and that's all you need to know. So while we're doing this, you can just doodle, have a conversation, play the dot game, whatever you need to do. But why we're together is as I look around, I don't know if all of you are parents of children or teenagers or young adults. Maybe some of you actually work with them. Maybe you're a grandparent. Whatever draws us together, we do have this commonality that we are here because we deeply care about kids and we want them to know and love Christ and follow him. That would be kind of the foundational reason why we are gathered together tonight. Now, as we raise our kids, our preparation starts young. We want them to, learn how to risk. We want to be culturally relevant. But even in the midst of that, as we're coming out of COVID, and literally, I'd been spent my whole life on airplanes, and I haven't been on an airplane since February. Dee and I went to Kenya in February, got off the plane on March 3rd, and March 12th, in the middle of the ACC basketball tournament, life changed for everybody. And this is it's really fun to be with you, but it's a little weird. And one of the things we're realizing is we're going to have to do a lot of work to understand what COVID's going to be doing to our kids. Because pre-COVID, Time Magazine did a major expose on the increase of anxiety and depression, and just about everybody else has for the last several years, is we've been seeing changes in culture that have affected kids and made life more difficult for them. So let's say, now we're talking about faith here. So you may go, hey, Chap, why are we talking about what kids are just going through? Let's just talk about them loving Jesus. It'd be wonderful if we can pull out their faith and their love for Christ and their engagement in a Christian community, church, from all the other stuff that they have to deal with. Unfortunately, we really can't do that. And I'm going to show you a little video because maybe you just want some tips of how do I help my kid? What's the easy, quick way to help my kid to understand the depth of what it means to be a lifelong Christian? Okay, everyone loves Raymond actually had that exact same experience. So maybe you can identify with this. Okay, well, you got a book. You have all kind of people, podcasts, and you listen maybe to other people saying different things, and you talk to friends, and you've had your own experience. And then it's easy for us, especially if you've been around the church a long time, and I know not everybody has, but if you've been around the church a long time, you may go to some of those verses that are those go-to verses for parents and everybody else, grandparents, youth workers. And you got this one from Proverbs 22. This is the New International Version of that, the NIV. Start children off on the way they should go. Even when they are old, they will not turn from it. You've probably heard that before. So our job is to get them into Christian preschool, and then we're done, right? So let's close in prayer. It's been a great evening. Thank you for taking the time. What does that actually mean? Well, in a very stable time in history, relatively, in a community at large that all of everybody saw all of life as being located within their life together as Israelites, you knew that for the most part, your neighbors, your friends, their kids' friends, everybody knew each other in your villages, you knew your tribe, you had all kind of background, and therefore the norms and values and expectations were really pretty much set. And so that's kind of the original context. But as life has gone on and gotten more complicated, even in the last, let's say, 20 or 30 years, what's interesting about grabbing onto something like this, first theologically, it's out of the book of Proverbs, which, yes, these are things that God wants us to know, but they are not necessarily corollary that you can say to God, hey, my kid's gone south, but we did everything we could when they were children. How could that possibly have happened? Because you promised that wouldn't happen. And all of us know so many stories, maybe even our own journey, where it's not quite as clean as some Christians make it out to be. But part of that is because a passage like this depends on where we put our emphasis. Start children off on the way they should go, and when they're old, they will not turn from it. We often will think of that as we determine the way they should go. That parenting, especially Christian parenting, is about making sure we define the lines, the trajectory, the ups and downs, the rocks along the way, the crossing the creeks, and do it in such a way that we will train them how to take that journey that we've preordained for them as parents, grandparents, pastors, youth pastors. But there's another way to read a verse like this. And actually, the intent of it is mixed with both what we do, but it also has this. Start off children the way they should go. That is so hugely important to what it means for us to care for our kids as they attempt to navigate the world and ultimately to find their way to Jesus Christ. It's not your journey that you are forcing them on. It is their journey. It's the way they should go as they follow Christ, which will certainly look different from the way that you follow Christ. In other words, as we disciple our kids, as we try to help build in them a deep faith, regardless of our role with that, or any young person, our job is not to try to prescribe for them what their journey will be and look like. The quickest way to lose them is to control, manipulate, or coerce them into following a road that we've chosen for them. Because somehow they've got to figure out that road with the Lord himself. And that's what it means to grow up. So, 3 things to remember as they walk on the way. Here's some thoughts for you. First, each person is an individual who is writing their own story. Each person is an individual who's going on the journey of writing the story, the narrative of their life. And what we are called to do is to be stewards of our responsibility as they write their story, not to write their story for them. I don't know if you've ever thought about that with your kids. But as your kids move through life, whether they're real small, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, or they move into middle school, high school, young adulthood, as parents, we want to so badly write their story. We want to point out where they're making the wrong decisions when we haven't given them the chance to try to figure out what that decision means for them. And it's such a dicey thing, a terrible thing. But let's not forget, this is their journey. We cannot control or manipulate their journey. Secondly, their way is winding and long. And I know you look at me and think I'm 39. I'm not. I'm actually 42. So I got a 39-year-old kid, 36-year-old kid, and a 32-year-old beautiful daughter. So the other 2 are obviously boys. All right, and as we've watched their journey, I've learned more from our 3 kids. Now, Dee's a therapist. She's smart. She already gets it. But our kids have done more to tutor us in the last 10 to 15 years of how their journey, they were trying to do that in the midst of what we were doing with them as we sought to introduce them to Jesus. And their journey has been long and winding. But, as I look at my journey, it may not have had exactly the same complications my kids had. The world was different when I was growing up. And yet, in the midst of those complications, their journey led them to a deeper and a deeper place, all 3 of them. Very different, but journeys of faith. And watching them and hearing from them, you can talk to other people that have had older kids who are still on that journey. It's long and winding. But there's hope, because that gets us to the 3rd thing. The Lord is always at work wooing them into his kingdom. You can rest assured from this moment forward that God is active and alive in your kid's life and loves them way more than you do. The Lord loves your child way more than you do. Your Lord is active and trying to make sure that he can figure out a way to convince these precious kids that we steward that he's alive and he's real and they can trust him. So that's where we began. I'm going to do this in 3 ways. One is, so what do we do? What's our job? To understand their journey so we can kind of figure out what it is they're navigating. Secondly, that we empathize for what their journey is like for them, which is very different from what our journey was like for us. Really important. And thirdly, that we can somehow equip them to follow Christ for a lifelong of faith. So first, understanding that's a new world. Let me show you something. Why this all matters is you can't separate spiritual development from human development. A lot of people try to do that. A lot of people try to say, as long as we disciple kids, we get them into church programs. I don't know if you guys do VBS. Do you guys do VBS, something like that? Something in the summer. Okay, you do a lot of programs, I know, for children. And we can do a lot of things for them spiritually, and it's easy to assume, and for those of you doing youth or children's ministry as well, it's really easy for us to think that all we have to worry about is a spiritual part of their life, their walk with Jesus. But the reality is you cannot separate who they are as people, what they go through, how the world affects them. You can't separate them from how they hear Jesus speak, encounter Christ in the scriptures, interact with other Christians. Their life journey interprets the spiritual realities that they're trying to figure out what to do with. And so we've got to understand what's going on with them as whole people as we attempt to introduce them to a lifelong of faith in Jesus. Okay, adolescence. We're going to talk about adolescence first. It starts in puberty when you get a lot of hair and you look kind of weird. And adolescence ends when you finally hit adulthood and you land and settle as a relative peer until finally you become a senior pastor in Newport Beach. Okay, that's the last one right there. Now, what I'm saying about this is we got child development is one thing, spiritually and physically and in all areas. And then you've got adults. And in the middle, you got this thing called adolescence. Let me show you something. This is how things are so different. Average age of female puberty is when every boy and girl begins to enter into this stage that's not quite child and not yet adult. I want to show you what's happened in the last 100 years. 100 years ago, roughly around 1900, more than 100 years ago, the average age of female puberty, and it's because of all kind of different factors that affect especially the female hormonal cycles. Average age of female puberty is 14 to 15 years old. That's also when the brain begins to change from concrete to abstract. You're a child where you find all your sense of self and identity located in your family. You ask a 7-year-old who they are, they will answer with demographic data. But they get to be 11, 13, 14 years old, and they're moving into early adolescence, and they begin to have to ask different questions of who they are. And they move through this time. Well, it all begins, that shift from child to adolescent, right on the average age of female puberty. The brain shifts at 14 to 15. And then 120 years ago or so, we noticed something. That there had always been in every culture this kind of middle ground between childhood and adulthood. Every single culture had, and they labeled it adolescere. You can go back and look at literature from 1900, 1500, 600 AD, and what you will find is this sense that culture has to figure out, what do I do with that no longer child, but they're not quite an adult, and they came up with some things. But around 100 years ago, a little more, we discovered that actually to become an adult took a little bit longer. Somehow, your body started to change at around 14, 15 years old, but you didn't quite land as an adult, a young adult, till about 16. In 1900, literally 9% of all of the kids in the country, in the US, went to pre-college, 9%. You know how many went to high school, what we consider high school, 1900? 1%. 1% of high school age kids in the US, other than those destined for college, and that was a very small percentage, they actually had more training than their peers because you were done with education at 14, the brain shifted, you had the training, you're not an adult. What happened? Between the 70s and the 80s, that's when this thing really started to ramp up. Average age female puberty dipped below 13, and you were more or less an adult in terms of your way you saw yourself, how other adults dealt with you. So let's say those of you who are roughly 40 to 50 and older, somewhere around the year or so after high school, you were pretty much settled to take charge of your life. Well, it was about a 5-year period. By the way, this is when youth ministry really kicked off. Youth ministry started taking off with basically late adolescents who are almost adults. And the methodology we developed with high school, with sports, with ministry, just about everything was dealing with people who were right on the cusp of adulthood. But something changed between those early years, 40 plus years ago, to today. Average age of female puberty. When boys and girls all psychosocially, psychologically, how they see themselves, socially, how they interact with others, they start right around 11, 12 years old. So you will see a shift if you have little kids right around 5th, 6th grade. If you haven't seen it yet, you will. And it's both boys and girls that begin to ask these questions of, wait a minute, how do I fit? Who am I? Do I have any impact on others? What does it mean that I need to have some sort of sense of self, sense of responsibility? And this is getting younger and younger, and a lot of you I know were near NASA and everything, and I've been told that this is one of the smartest places in the country. I really appreciate that, but I'm not one of those guys. I'm much more social science stuff. But I did the math on this, and this is serious. I did the math by the year 2034, girls are going to be born pregnant. This is something we've got to just go to. Now, when somebody an adult, and this is not chap stuff, this is what's out there, okay? People that study human development says, especially in our culture, for women, it's mid to late 20s until you finally settle as an adult. And for men, mid to late 50s, that sucker goes on, and on. We call it fantasy sports. And but the reality is, what has happened in the last, especially 30 to 40 years, is this middle period of life has stretched so much where you're trying to figure out, as a child, you don't have to figure it out. Your sense of self, your identity, your purpose, how you fit, where you fit, that's all located in your family system. You're like Dory, the fish. You just know the ocean you swim in when you're a child. But then you get into this thing we call adolescence, adolescere. You're not yet an adult. And so you don't know the answers to those questions. You can ask your 13-year-old something. Why did you do that? You can ask your 17-year-old that. You can ask a 20-year-old, what were you thinking about? How does this reflect who you are? It is extremely difficult for them to be able to answer that, so they fall back on what they think the answer is supposed to be. And what happens is, this is really important for you to realize, is you might have hit adulthood somewhere around 20-ish. Some of you are a little bit younger, late 30s, and you probably hit adulthood somewhere maybe 22, 23 years old. But I'm telling you, be ready for your kids to still struggle in their 20s with who they are, what they really believe, who can they trust. Well, the reason I show you this is to let you know that our culture has so elongated this period of the in-between that actually what happens is for so many of them, this is when we expect faith to be rooted and to be done. But a 17-year-old doesn't know what it means to die to self because they don't have a self to die to. So how can they fall in love with Jesus in the way we throw out the concepts and the phrases that maybe we may be very used to, but that has such different meaning as they attempt to understand, but who am I in the middle of this? What does God actually think of me when I wonder myself? Now let me show you one more piece of this whole thing. This is about stages in their life. As this thing has stretched, here's what's happened. The left pole is the pole of childhood, where you're dependent on your family system for who you are and what you think. It's real easy to get children to become Christians, by the way. Anybody can get a child to accept Jesus if you are skilled enough at it and have the right environment for that. Because what that is a very concrete thing, and if it's an adult they trust, then they just put those two things together and done. But something begins to happen when they begin to hit this thing called early adolescence, roughly 11 or 12 to about 15. junior high roughly, this is when your brain is still very concrete. You don't have abstract abilities yet, but you're just now feeling a little wobbly. If you want a definition of middle school kids, do you guys call them junior high or middle school here? That would be actually rhetorical. I was really curious. So, both, perfect. Then I'm very safe. That's good. But when you're a 13, 14-year-old trying to experience life, life's wobbly. Because sometimes you are beginning to embark on these really newfound quasi-adulthood abilities, thoughts, conversations. But then you fall back on so much childhood. Scholars that study early adolescence talk about this is the period where the brain says, use it or lose it. It's anything that I experienced growing up. I got to figure out if it's going to be useful as I move forward when I'm a little wobbly. What do they think of me? That's the question of the day. Well, then 14 or 15, here's what's interesting. This is when the brain actually begins to shift. And it looks like for all of time, the brain began to shift out of this concrete, everything's real. I bring it all in, then I start to discard. And then I begin to shift all this data that's inside. And these different bits of data start to connect as I move from first person moving through life, that's your middle school kid and children, into kind of a third person. You kind of get like a video game. You moved out of the car and you can see other cars. That's abstract thinking. And here's what happens when you're abstract thinking. All of a sudden, you know you got to make decisions. You got to figure out what's important. You got to figure out who to trust. You got to figure out what you're going to do with your life and how you're going to live according to the implications and opportunities that you find yourself experiencing. Well, what happens is because this thing has gone now, I don't think that works on there. This thing has gone now, see that little part in the middle? Around 19 or 20 for most kids, they actually shift into what we call emerging adulthood. It used to be called late adolescence, and some of you may still be there. This is why a lot of people are studying, and all this is pre-COVID. A lot of people are studying to try to figure out why is it that so many late 20-year-old people seem to still be floundering? Why are they struggling with the concept of paying a parking ticket before it trebles in price? Or get somebody else to pay for their phone bill or car insurance? Why do 48% pre-COVID, last January, 48% of people between 19 and 30 years old lived at home by their own definition of that? Half. It's because somehow this whole experience of wondering, who am I? What's my purpose? What do I believe in? Who do I trust? Where do I go? Before they finally settle in to get the rhythm of moving as an independently functioning, interdependent adult. This is all crucial to their faith. Because in the middle of all of that, this is key. Faith is utilitarian. Here's what that means. Faith is a tool for me to survive the experience of not understanding myself in life. So when a 15-year-old or a 19-year-old gives their life to Jesus, they may deeply mean it, of course. But what they mean it is, what is God, think of me, what's God going to do for me? I invite you just to consider, take a look now and then of worship songs that have been written in the last 5 years. What percentage of the worship songs that most churches like ours, I don't know about you guys, but I do know ours, what they actually are saying when they praise the Lord. And I would contend, and our worship team has actually worked on this and came to me with this idea, as they said, we need to get some different songs. That most of the worship songs that were really responded to by young adults were, you do this for me, Lord, I praise you. You do that for me, Lord, I'm so grateful. That's because life is hard. This is the world, if you have kids that are elementary, middle school, even high school, this is the world that they are moving towards and entering into. And the world has changed. If that doesn't cause you to slow down a little bit in terms of how you view what their life is supposed to be, then I just want to invite you to take a deeper look, because I promise you that every single child who's moving through this process at some level is struggling because they just don't know how they're going to make it. There is a greater anxiety, greater depression in this particular generation of adolescents and emerging adults than has ever been recorded. When I first got to St. Andrews, because I had been a youth and family person, Chris Alston, Dr. Chris Alston, who's part of your guys' fellowship here, was my doctoral student at Fuller Seminary, which was really fun. We studied some of this kind of stuff. I first got to St. Andrews. I left Fuller just 3 years ago, actually yesterday. And about 2 weeks into it, I got a call saying, you need to get over to CDM High School, Corona Del Mar High School, because something horrific just happened. A junior in high school, maybe sophomore in high school, had written 3 notes. A note to the community, a note to the school, and a note to their parents. Very lucid, very clear. Teachers have been great. I love my baseball coach. My parents have been fantastic. The kid went to youth group regularly, so the family had a faith. And he wrote, but there's this one teacher that was mean to me. That's all he said. Very lucid. And it got everywhere, just splattered all over social media. And so he took his own life in the most horrific way that I've ever heard of. I won't go into details with you. I'd been in the job as a pastor at a large Presbyterian church right in the heart of this community for 2 weeks. And then one of their very own, a kid where the family was well known in the community. And everybody said, you know what they said? We had no idea. Everything's great. Goes to church, loves Jesus, loves his teachers. Baseball's his favorite thing. Very lucid letter. One teacher was enough for that kid to throw it in. Now, obviously, that's an extreme example, but it's becoming less extreme in U.S. culture, especially after COVID. Therefore, you really want to help your kids? You want to help your kids have a lifelong faith? We don't say this hard enough in Sticky Faith, but I only get a little over an hour with you, a couple hours, for you to ask questions. And I'm trying to do a little poking, because I'm a granddaddy of 3 granddaughters, and I got a grandson coming in June. So I'm getting more pokey as I get older. So feel free to text questions and even challenge some of this stuff. But really, our job is to be a student of our children. You know what it means to be a student of your children? It means to shift. Think of the imagery that we all grew up on of education. It's what I did at Fuller all those years, where one person would do this, stand up here, and then everybody else would sit out there, right? And the students would be in the chairs, and the teacher would have all the information and all the power, and that's what you do. Here's what you have to do to help your kid navigate all of this, especially to bring Jesus into the mix of it, is to put down the eraser and get up from the chair or the stool at the front and go back into the midst of kids and ask them to go up one at a time to teach the class. We've got to get into a posture of saying, I really want to know what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you're wrestling with, what you're struggling with. We're going to talk about trust in a little while. But I'll give you the little cliff notes right now, the little trailer. It's not really about you trusting your kids to be the kind of parent they need. It's can they trust you? It's really hard for us to get outside of our own experience, our own skin, and it's worse when we act like this is how it is and that's how it's going to be. If that becomes the way that we operate, you will have no chance to lead them into a vibrant relationship with Jesus. Because if they feel like the authority figures in their life are telling them, don't talk, you listen. Don't tell me what you're feeling, you need to know what I'm feeling. As we put pressure and exert control, that causes them to shut down even more inside of themselves and will cause them to flee us. And by the way, we represent Jesus to kids. You're going to read that in Sticky Faith. Thirdly, We need to see life through their eyes. We're going to talk about that with empathy in a minute. To see life through our kids' eyes means that we allow ourselves to take these things that we've become so convinced of. Some of us have carried these things since we were small children with our own families. Most of our parenting attitudes and perspectives and even behaviors come out of our own experience, even if they were horrifically unhealthy. We may, in our soul, want to do deep work over the pain that was inflicted by a parent or a grandparent or a teacher or a coach in our own life. And yet what we tend to do, instead of actually going to those places and dealing with them ourselves, we will take them and codify them in such a way that will perpetuate whatever it is we've received ourselves. And in this culture, you guys, we can't do that anymore. Maybe we got away with it for several decades. World War II, through the 50s and early 60s, the upheaval of the 60s, what came out of that, well, a lot of people say the 70s was the me decade, where we kind of celebrated selfishness, that competition was more important than cooperation, that as long as we get what we think we need and we deserve and we want, then we can build our own little fiefdoms. The problem with that is that the culture has somehow not given kids what they need to feel like they can move forward. And so how do we see through their eyes? Well, probably by asking them. Probably by, instead of having the movie in the car or the van or the SUV when we're going for a vacation or just going to drive somewhere for 30 minutes, we don't put on the TV thing. We don't have the music blaring. We just ask a question and see if we can get some kind of beautiful conversation. Maybe we actually have meals at least once, twice, 3 times a week, as much as you can, where you turn off the cell phones a half an hour before dinner. And there is no electronics while you all prepare the finishing touches for dinner. Instead of it's your turn, it's your chore. Or you do that, in many cases, mom. And then you gather together over a meal, but the meal is about the feast of the relationships and not about the food itself. Isn't that beautiful? And so dinner starts a half an hour before the food is served. Dinner's not finished until the last voice is heard and the last argument is made to try to convince somebody else, you need to understand this. What if we did that as a regular habit? And then we all clean the kitchen together and then go about our business that way. You invest an hour and a half at mealtime once, twice, or 3 times a week. Your kids will feel like that you want to know. Can you imagine what it would be like for an 11-year-old or a 16-year-old, or when they come home and they're 23 and they actually get up from the table going, I was allowed to disagree. They heard me. Now I can have some more solid footing to move on with my life. See, let me give you an example of this. I know that luckily sports is not a big deal in this part of Texas. I'm really aware that I've done my research. And this is the first Little League team. I don't know if you knew that, 1937. Isn't that a cool team? You'll notice a lot of things here, and if we took time, and if we had more time, we could break down things you see. Like, for example, it's mixed, both boys and girls. It's all kind of ages, roughly 6, 7 years old till about 15 years old. Boys and girls, no uniforms. See the person on the far right with the big white collar. They let that little boy wear a dress in 1937. They were really interested in letting kids just express themselves. That's a lie. I just want to see if you're still awake. That's the first Little League team. But here's the most important thing I want you to see in this. Who's not in the picture? Coach, yes. When did the first coach go, hey, hold it. Don't take the picture yet. I need to get in there. Spandex, tight shirt. Holding the little sign with the white letters and the black background. Remember that? When was the first guy that said, I need to wear a uniform as a Little League coach coming down the stairs? I would love to, when I go to heaven, I hope that there's a Betamax library where you can find a video that are just ludicrous. Who was the first one to wear the baseball uniform for a Little League game? And to hear his wife go, seriously? I'd just love to see that conversation. Because you know why there's no coach? Because the coach didn't matter. Little League wasn't for the coach. Little League was for the kids. The point of doing this farmer decided, I want to teach kids the great game of baseball. I'm a Rockies fan, so we've never actually used that word to describe it, great game of baseball. And then something changed. Remember, this is in the 30s. Then as the decades wore on and we began to see kids want to help them, we want to serve them, we not only gave them coaches, we gave them equipment, we gave them uniforms, Max's Diner, awesome. But somehow coaches kept getting into the picture. And then parents started getting into the picture more. And then it became a lot less about the development of kids to enjoy the beautiful sport that we call America's pastime. And that it became much more about the teachers and the coaches and the parents and the boards. This is just one example. You can go in almost any system or structure or institution or organization that was originally developed to serve the needs of developing kids so that they can become a healthy member of society, become one of us, that we shifted it from being about their development, which actually became political in the last several years, which is amazing to me as a scholar who studies this stuff. How can you make it political to say it's all about the kids? Of course it's all about the kids. It's always been about the kids in every culture forever, because the only legacy, the only thing we have that carries on who we are is our kids. Our children are the ones that we entrust with everything we hold dear. That's why the Psalms say, from generation to generation, they will praise your name. That's why we talk about lifelong faith, because for them to live into who God has created them to be, it's about their faith journey, and our job is to get out of the dang picture, to quit making it about us. What we've done is we've moved from that to making Little League and piano lessons and SAT scores and everything else that happens in a kid's life today so that they have every opportunity to become the kind of person that we hope they are going to be. Think about that language. Words matter. Who are we trying to make our kids to be? Who do you want your child to be when they're 35 years old? Well, you're gathered here because you want your child to be a follower of Jesus Christ. That's why you're here, I think. Or maybe you thought we were selling something. I don't know. But if that's really true, then our strategic stewardship of their life extends beyond driving them to church stuff and getting them in small groups and hassling their small group leader or their Sunday school teacher, or making sure the camp that we ship them off to, while we do something else, is all there is to their faith in Jesus. If we want them to truly find their sense of self, then we need to remember that every decision we make when they're 6, when they're 9, when they're 15, when they're 22, even when they're in their 30s, will have an impact on the kind of person that they will become, because they look to us, not only parents, but all of us as an adult community, to guide them into the way they should walk. David Elkind, who's one of my great heroes, he wrote a book called The Hurried Child in the early 80s. And in that book, he, as a child psychiatrist, he discovered that what we were doing, he used the language of we hurry kids in all the things I'm talking about. The way I've talked about it and written about it in different things is, yes, we hurry them, but I also think in our hurrying, we abandon them by what Lance called outsourcing in a conversation we had today. That we abandon our kids. We abandon our commitment to sitting on the curb with them for 45 minutes or having a dinner that lasts an hour and a half where they can actually argue with us in safety. but Elkind discovered in the early 80s, and he wrote this book, and then he updated it in 1991, he updated in 2001, then in the late 2000s, 2005, 2007, he wrote it again because it was getting worse and worse and worse, and here's his diagnosis. Today's child has become the unwilling, unintended victim of overwhelming stress. The stress born of rapid, bewildering social change and constantly rising social expectations. My daughter-in-law is a physics and biology teacher, and she's had to do the Zoom thing, as I'm sure a lot of you have been dealing with that. And she has wept over the numbers of her kids that were trying to do a good job while they were live, and they were barely hanging on to a B just because the concepts weren't quite getting it. If I got a B in physics in high school, I tell you, I would have danced a jig, I would have mowed somebody's lawn, I would have just gone off the charts. But she started weeping because almost all of her B students are failing. What the COVID and the online thing has done is some kids have figured out how to work it and how to make it happen for them, but most kids have not. It's not just about getting them to school for social relationships. It's getting them to school so they actually can look at a teacher in the eye and say, I want to do a little bit better, but I don't know how. You can't do that on Zoom. It's really hard to. Well, what we've done in the last 40 years as a culture, we moved toward fragmentation, probably more like the 50s, late 50s through the 60s. People that study that period of time in the Western world called it a deconstruction, deconstructing so many assumptions that we had held, at least the dominant culture. And so we fragmented more, and we moved much more into smaller, intense groups of community right through the 60s and 70s. And now the word that's being used that actually has been borrowed from the hard sciences is a word called now we're atomized. Here's the problem, everything I'm saying to you, especially now that I've been a pastor for 3 years. When I was a professor and I was a writer and I'd do stuff like this all over the place, it was easy because I could just say stuff and hope you like it and boy, that'd be great and tell students and kind of, but when you're a pastor and all of a sudden after a sermon, you sit down for 20 minutes and you hear somebody say, you know, you mentioned loneliness. I'm incredibly lonely. And it brought up inside of me in my 60s the reality that people feel so lost and disconnected. If we're going to help our kids, we've got to figure out first how to take care of our own stuff, our own loneliness, our own insecurities, our own fear. We go to church. We hear the gospel. We read all these beautiful things. We even engage in missions and ministry and small groups, and we give selflessly of our time and our resources. And yet so many of us feel so alone. Tap into that as you're a parent. Because your kids feel it far more than you do, and they have far less resources to be able to deal with it. We're talking about how do we understand them. Here's the data just to get this done. We're going to get into some good positive stuff here. Okay, the car is running in case you get mad. So I'll just, first, kids have been hurried. Elkind, we talked about it. Adolescence has changed. There's less support for adults than ever before. And there's more stress and pain than ever. That's what the data shows. And it's going to be way worse once we start really unpacking what's happened because of not only COVID, but COVID coupled with the racial strife, the polarization politically, and all of what we have faced in the last year, January 6th. How are our kids going to come out of this? How are they going to become the person that needs to walk on that road with Christ? Well, here's the bottom line to understanding. It's in the book, and we talk about it a lot in the book. If you do decide to read it, create a community of like-minded parents to walk with you and your child. I coined a ratio that had actually been around a long time in youth ministry, which was really my background way back. First Young Life for years and then doing other stuff, youth ministry. in 5 to 1. You know what 5 to 1 was in youth ministry? It's you get 5 kids to 1 adult leader. It's great because you can take all of them in the car, and 4 of them will be in seatbelts, and the other one's a senior pastor's child, so it's okay. And you just have your 5 kids, and those are my kids, and everybody, young life leaders and youth people, say, this is my kids, 5 to 1. As if I can do ministry to 5 different stories, to 5 different backgrounds, to 5 different family systems, to a complexity of insecurity and loneliness, to maybe 30% of a high school goes to the prom. Maybe in your part of town, it's 50% of kids that go to the prom. Awesome. But when you talk about the prom to the other 50%, what do they feel? Here's a good likelihood one of your kids may not go to the prom or homecoming. How do they deal with that when they've heard about it their whole life? What's 5 to 1? It can't be one person who cares with 5 young people in transition. We got to take that ratio, and based on everything we know about development, we got to flip it on its head. Every child needs 5 non-parental adults in their life who has no reason to care, but do anyway. Your child, the best thing you can do for them developmentally is create a community of love and support and understanding around your kid of at least 5 non-parental adults. Rarely that will be a youth pastor, almost never, because they just can't do that. Maybe a small group leader, but it's got to be further than 1 year. Coach, teacher, never, almost. What about grandparents, extended family? That's okay. But if that's all it is, there's the family dynamics that actually have different rules that come alongside with this. I'm saying your kid, your job is to get adults to care about your child and to walk with them through life. How do you do that, chap? Well, you find some other adults to fall in love with, open up your life to them. I'm not talking small group programs. Who cares about programs? The days are dark. We got to get at this thing called Christianity. I mean, find some friends. And if you can't find friends, that's the job of your staff. Clear Creek staff are absolutely committed to helping you, like I was with that guy that talked to me about his loneliness. Tell me about your friends. I don't have any real friends. Let's work on that. And you get 5 friends. And then you all covenant, if some of them have kids, that you are going to love their children. And you promise you'll be there when they have their 16th birthday. And when they come back from school or the military, and when they get married, you will all throw them the biggest party for that engagement as a body. See, you really want to be a great parent and help your kid? You just create a community in a world where there's so little community. That's how you understand. That's how you respond to all the things that kids are doing. And I bet we're going to have a lot of questions as we do this. So now that we understand, then we need to develop this rich and profound ability to experience empathy. And I didn't do Brené Brown's name simply because I'm in Houston. If you've never heard of her, she's awesome, okay? She's at the University of Houston. She's, I think, has a PhD in social work, but she has really risen up started with a major TED Talk and gone on. If you haven't heard of Brené Brown, her books are outstanding. She does a whole lot of these small little videos where she just shows you something that that makes sense, that brings something down. So I'm going to show you a little video here. You guys ready for that? I'm not going to play the whole thing of it, but I want to show you the idea, why is empathy so incredibly important as you're a parent or a grandparent or a small group leader, whatever role you play. Take a look. I decided to show you the whole thing. Let's take a look at some of her key points, especially as she writes on empathy. One is to steward this relationship. And again, we will be moving into where Jesus and faith fits into this picture. But to actually build the infrastructure, the environment, the relational, the social, even the physical environment where faith can actually matter in the life of your child. We've got to build this infrastructure. We've got to have this landscape. And that's the first thing. Ask yourself, do you have a sacred space? And it doesn't have to be physical. But oftentimes it can be physical, where you have a certain corner of the living room where you both go when you really want to just share life together, when you sense something's going on. Maybe sitting on their bed would be kind of an anecdote of that. But I would encourage for each one of your kids, and it's going to be different for each one, they're going to respond differently, but to be able to create a space where that over time and when they need to, they know that they can let down their guard and share with you what's inside. And I got to tell you, typically I hate the gender stereotypes, but I think mostly they're driven by culture and not by God's design. I think men and women are designed by God to be equally empathetic. But culturally, women are way better at this naturally. And there's an expectation for women to be better at this naturally. Guys, you do not get off the hook biblically. I'm sorry, but after being around a long time and around the publishing world and around the speaking and all that stuff, is so often you hear these reports, these people saying that men are this way because God created you this way and women are this way to be created. But often the men stuff has nothing to do with kindness, with tenderness, with gentleness. But those words are all used in the Bible to describe a disciple. There is no distinction in the scriptures of the characteristics of a disciple for a male and for a female. No distinction. Guys, we got to learn how to be empathetic with our kids. We have to. Because when they get older, the game gets harder and the stakes get higher. And if our relationship has been about rules and control and consequences and support and strength, then the day comes your kid is really falling flat on their face. They're not going to be able to sit with you in that sacred space. They're not going to be able to find a sacred space with you. Now, is it ever too late? No, it's never too late. We have a God of redemption and new life, and he does it all the time. But we got to give ourselves to this place where we are going to provide the sacred space for our kids. That's the first thing that they desperately need. Secondly, be mindful of the power of trust. I told you this was coming. If your kid does not trust your response, they will not tell you the truth. They may lie anyway, okay? I just want you to know that's part of the game often. But the facts are, if they don't trust you, if they know how to push your buttons, which they do from a very early age, by the time they're 15, they've heard every speech, many times. And to think that you might be empathetic in a particular situation, oftentimes they will run tapes of when we weren't. And what happens is they don't trust us to tell us the truth. And with kids having just a blanket of anxiety and depression and fear and loneliness, where do they go? Oh, they want to go to their dad. Oh, they want to go to their mom, their grandma, their grandpa, a friend, one of the 5 to 1, whatever role you play. But they got to trust that you're not going to click into old tapes. And that they can really trust you, that you will calm yourself and not react, but respond. Then carving out times for intentional connectedness. I've already talked about this with the dinner time. Let me do another one. I don't know what you do for vacations, but maybe as a family, you take a look at your vacations and ask questions of what's the purpose of our vacation and what do we want to get out of it, and give your kids a little bit of say into those times when you actually do spend together. Don't always have it be about the parents or just about the kids, but figure out how together you navigate into times when you actually spend time together. And lastly, there is no substitute for listening. There is no substitute for listening. I need to move to equipping now. No, you know what? I'm going to show you this. Here's why. A lot of times when families are attempting to figure out how to deal with tough circumstances, is that what we will do is we will finally give in, and therapists will tell you this, that we may want our kid to come in and be the initiator. We may kind of expect our kid to be the one to initiate conversations, to tell us something that's going on, to somehow build that bridge of trust. And maybe you saw this several years ago, a couple of years ago, of this 6-year-old little Korean-American girl that her parents were really struggling, and she decided to sit her mom down. I'm going to show you this video real quickly. Yeah, out of the mouths of babes, right? Your child is capable of that. Whether or not they'll ever say that to you, they watch and they listen. Okay, now we talked about understanding and empathizing and building this bridge of trust, this relational sense where they feel like you actually do care, you're invested in them, you're walking with them. All of that is so crucially important, and that's what sets the stage. Now, what about sticky faith? How do we equip them to be followers of Christ? Here's the first thing that we learned in the research that goes into the book that you'll read this, is that the number one factor of your child walking with Jesus over the long haul in a significant, authentic way is based on your faith. If they experience your faith as a cultural faith, a political faith, a shallow faith, then they will not even explore the possibility of giving themselves to that. Unfortunately. I know that puts a huge burden on parents. But you know what? They don't want to see a perfect faith. They want to see a real faith. They want to know what you struggle with and what makes you nervous about your walk with Jesus and how your walk with Jesus impacts the way you spend money, the way you spend time, the way you talk about people, the way that you give yourself to certain things and are abhorred by other things. And if you bring Jesus to every little corner of your life as a faithful disciple of him, that will have the biggest impact in your kid's life. It's when you tell them that you are a sincere Christian and then they see something in their perspective is different than that. And by the way, the last few years, for an awful lot, of roughly 16 to 30-year-olds have looked at this country, and an awful lot of them that came out of communities of faith have looked at what's gone on the last several years and gone, I'm not going to be aligned with that. Now, good or bad, what does this have to do with Jesus? So this is the kind of conversation for your kids to be engaged in with you that is real. And if you're not sure if it's real or you just don't, you struggle in faith, again, this is a great church. You've got great people to help you with that. And as your kids see you wrestle through these things, they will give themselves as well. Secondly, you got to build an environment of respect, and that goes across the board. When I talked about trust, obviously that's an element of respect for your child. But if they see you not respecting other human beings, or somebody that has a different opinion of life than you do, and you say things, especially disparagingly, then your kid will wonder, if you don't have respect for others, will you have respect for me as I go through a complicated journey? That road is long and windy. As a follower of Jesus, respect is a very key aspect of how we live that out, even and especially in the midst of people that we disagree with. The mark of the gospel and the biblical faith that we espouse is a mark of tenderness and gentleness and respect. 1 Peter 3:15, that's one you can look up on your own. And if your kid sees that you have respect for people because of the dignity of the image of God in that person, then they may say, I will let you into my journey of faith, because I believe you'll have respect for me, even if for a season I see it differently than you do. Thirdly, this is really hard. Sorry. This is the hardest thing to do, to teach your kid to think critically. You know why? Because to teach them to think critically is you got to give them permission to criticize you. That's really hard. What you really want to tell your kid is, listen, I've done this a long time, I figured it out, and here's the deal. That's kind of called parenting. But the reality is our kids need to figure out how to think for themselves. There's a lot of people talking about and writing about the fact that our greatest fear as parents of Christian kids is they'll go to college and they'll have some kind of teacher that will put into their minds this stuff that's antithetical to the gospel. We're so afraid of philosophy that we want to equip our kids with what we term apologetics. But the best apologetics is not about the content of the gospel, it's about the content of the heart. We don't, if our kid is on a journey to think critically, we don't have to worry when they go off somewhere and leave our home if they've been taught how to think deeply about faith that they own. They can respectfully enter into disagreement with others because you taught them how to do that at home. How do you do that? By allowing your kids to disagree. By giving them every opportunity to argue with you about anything, except for the things where you got to keep them safe and boundaried as your stewardship requires you to do of their lives. But I mean about how we think about individuals, how we think about people we disagree with, how we think about such topics that maybe you don't talk about much, but they're going to talk about it, having to do with human sexuality and all the aspects that come along with that, how we deal with economics, how we understand and define the term justice. Even if you don't like systemic racism as a phrase, it's being used on the national platform, and your kids need to talk about that. Will you let them enter in to a time and a season, especially when they hit about 14 and on, to really go after some of these things, even if it drives you crazy to talk about it? And you know what? Say that. You tell them, this drives me crazy. I don't want to hear you say that stuff, but I love you. Teach me what you think. Wouldn't it be wonderful if your kid comes back from college and says, here's 3 things that we didn't talk about, but we're talking about them now. And you go, awesome, let's go. Let's go to that sacred space and have that conversation. And then expand their horizons. It is not your job to narrow their experience. It is your job to expand their experience. I'll say it again. It's not your job to narrow their experience. It's your job to expand their experience so that they can realize that life is far more complicated, filled with gray areas. They know that the polarization is very real. But do they really know why from a variety of angles? It's not simple bumper sticker life by waving a flag or a banner for one side or another of any particular issue, but helping our kid to actually meet people, engage in opportunities. So when I talked about vacations before, I really want to invite you to consider, when you go on a family vacation, what's the point? Spend time together, of course, have some fun, sure. But what if this became one of the most important factors of you and your family and your children trying to expand their life experience? If you have no friends who disagree with you, you are limiting your kids. If you have no friends and other people that see the world differently than you, you have stifled their ability to begin to explore those edges so that they can come to a more well-rounded understanding of who Jesus is, because Jesus is the God of all. And your kid needs to experience that. Lastly, train them so their vocation is to serve Jesus in the kingdom of God. This is where I'm about to finish. And so you can be sending in your questions. The word vocation comes from the Latin word vocare. And the word vocare really doesn't mean paycheck, okay? What do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a school teacher. I want to be in the medical field. I want to be an engineer. Like me and every other kid my age, wanted to be an astronaut. Maybe there's some of you that are here. You know, I want to be a pilot in the Air Force. But see, none of that is really the essence of vocation theologically, biblically. Vocation is, what do I give my life to? Vocation is my purpose. Vocation is the direction that I line my life with so that everything will move in that direction. In other words, as I line my life this way, then decisions regarding where I live, how I spend money, what I do in my relationship to others, how I engage others, what I do for leisure or not, is all in alignment with my vocari. Your kid needs purpose. Absolutely. 3 basic elements of human development is identity. Who am I? Well, the faith teaches us to remind them that they are the child of God, that God loves, created, put a stamp of his image there, and your kid is God's child. God's daughter, God's son. Identity. Then what we talk about before is autonomy. I mentioned that without using that word, a sense of self, but that must lead to purpose. Why am I even here? Do I have anything to contribute? Thirdly, belonging. That's the 5-to-1. Identity, purpose, belonging are the 3 aspects of healthy human development. But this one, when our value system says the point of life is to compete with others and come out on top. The point of life is that I get into the best schools as I compete with others. To have enough on my resume that I can go to the place and be perceived as the person that actually can achieve the kind of things I want to achieve. Even the point of life is a particular career. That is not Christian parenting. That's cultural parenting. It's not a bad thing, but it must be subservient to their vocari. If you want your child to follow Jesus, then from the time they're really little, and it's never too late, maybe your youngest child's in their 30s, now you can bless their vocari. Now you can enter into that sacred space to discuss who God has created and called them to be. By the way, you could be all state and you could even play football at Notre Dame, or if you can't get in, UT. Just kidding. Just Rice. Yeah, well, wow. Okay. The kicker from Tulane. How about that? That's pretty good. You can be all state. You can actually get a college scholarship. Wow, good. Yeah, obviously, I was an incredible athlete, so I can speak to this. Thank you, too, for laughing. And by the time you graduate from college and you got that job and you're at the bottom of the totem pole and you're a Christian, but you're 25 years old and the only thing you know how to do to have a relationship is to go clubbing, nobody cares that you were all state. It doesn't matter. And once you get a job, nobody cares where you went to college, usually. What's the vocari? Not bad to seek the best kind of schools for the kind of person that we think I am, but that's not the ultimate point. The ultimate point is God has created you to use you as an agent of the kingdom of God. Jesus means it when he says in Mark 10, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it. Everything that I've talked about so far points directly to that verse. We need to teach our kids that to know Jesus is to dance and to sing and to care and to engage from the inside out. That's who your kid is. I guarantee you, when you first held your child, you did not say, boy, I hope you go to a great school and you're just one of many at your fraternity. I hope you get a great job so you make enough money so that somehow you can understand what I've been put through by raising you. No chance. You held that kid and went, like in Lion King. You held them up for everybody to see. You had dreams for your child, your son and your daughter. I got 3 granddaughters, and I hate that they're raised in a culture that still will objectify them from the time they're little tiny kids. And it's already started with my 5-year-old. I hate that. But what do we need to do? We need to build into those young women that God has created them with power and strength to be able to serve him and follow him in a way that will change the world so that they can withstand the darts and the arrows of the world that would seek to diminish them. Your kid has power and strength in Christ. And if they're set free to dance, and they trust you enough to sit and to weep and to laugh That's why Paul uses the metaphor of parenting in his discipleship. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, he said, in discipling, talking about discipleship to those Christians in Thessalonica, we were gentle among you like a mother. We gave you not only the gospel of God, but our very lives as well. You got to be gentle. Guys, women, be gentle. And then especially as they go through adolescence and young adulthood, you don't let go of the gentleness. But Paul moves on in verses 11 and 12 where he says this, like a father. Get this, dads, you want to know your job biblically? There's two things that say do nots. Do not exasperate and do not embitter your kids, okay? So don't exasperate, push their buttons. Don't embitter them, the slow drip of bitterness because of critique. But the positive, like a father, Paul says, this is so beautiful. We were there. I was there to encourage you, to comfort you, and to urge you to live lives worthy of the gospel you've received. The urging is not the urging of the Little League coach that says, keep your eye on the ball, what's the matter with you? But it's the urging of a fan that believes you got great potential and you're on the way. Gentle, comforting, encouraging, and urging like a fan, where ultimately that you is plural. As your kid comes to faith in Jesus, whether they're young, middle-aged, old, as they come to faith in Jesus, that faith is a corporate faith. That you is plural. There's great strength when we come together as the body of Christ. There's great power when we lead our kids together to the feet of Jesus, but not as individual secret agents, but as the corporate body of Christ that he's unleashing to bring his shalom, his peace to the world. Oh, what an adventure. And you know what? What's great about it is you don't have to be good at it. In fact, if you just admit you're crummy at it, you're going to do much better. It's when you go, doggone, or I don't know, I'm not sure I can do it. That's what's great about our Lord, because when we just let go of the vice grip we have on our own perspectives, we soften our hearts a little bit to receive his grace. That's when he takes us to those places and uses us in ways we could never think or imagine. Your kids are just longing for you to be the face, the hands, the arms, the mercy, the grace of Jesus Christ. You want sticky faith? You just give your kids Jesus and learn how to dance with them. That's all I got. That's my life right there, right in a nutshell for you guys. Thank you. And now we're going to come up and do something and then have some. Thanks, everybody.
All right, we're going to take about 4 minutes. If you need a restroom break, we're going to reset with a couple of tables. We're going to get the questions loaded up, and then we'll start some Q&A. So if you haven't submitted a question, you have one, you can still go to slido.com and use the code PARENT. And if you see a question on there that's similar to one you'd already asked, you can like it, and it'll move up the list. All right, I'm going to give you a couple minutes. We are down to about 26 minutes until 9 o'clock. We're going to answer as many questions as we can. We obviously won't be able to answer all of them, but let's get started. All right, the one that, let's do this. How do I speak to my kid about homosexuality, if it's a relative or just a topic in general? Because they're having these conversations, or as they get older, they will have these conversations. How do parents start those conversations? There you go.
Oh, I wasn't on. I did it. I turned it off. That's probably the first thing to do, depending on their age. I would say very, very lightly when they're up until they're about 10 years old, unless there's a reason, a family member or somebody, a neighbor, and you feel like you need to just talk about them. But I would say always have as the baseline of the conversation at first, as they get into junior high, and especially as they get older, the dignity of the human person. Start there, always. That's easy biblically, and if you need help, your pastoral staff, Lance right here, will take in fact, he wants you to call him tonight on a cell phone. Generally late would be probably better.
Or email me at yancey@clearcreek.org.
And Phil Yancey will really love that too. Sorry. Secondly, your kids get into roughly high school and older, do your best to make it a conversation, not a monologue. Find out what they think and why, and commit to studying it together, both in the scriptures and what other people say about that. I don't know if you know this, but Christians have a difference of opinion depending on what the specific topic is. It's good to have convictions, though. It's okay to have convictions. It's good. But if your convictions keeps your kid from actually exploring it for themselves and talking to you about it, that's not necessarily good. So you can say, I feel very strongly about it, and here's the 3 reasons why. And look at Scripture is your best bet. So that's what I'd say about that particular topic.
I appreciate how that fits with what you said earlier. This environment of respect as you're talking to your kids is huge. What about when it's your kid?
You start with the dignity and the image of God. Actually, I love that question because it shouldn't matter, first of all. Because at the bottom line is hopefully you will love the person before you and you will treat them with love and respect, at least for the person. But if you go through understand, empathize, equip, and that you use that as and that's actually linear, that's pretty important, to try to understand what your kid is thinking and feeling. It's a really tough thing in this culture, especially for Christians who view homosexual activity as outside of God's plan. What's rebellion against? Some consider rebellion against God. But when your child is feeling like that's their only way to understand themselves, I think trying to understand why they feel that way and what they're thinking, and also how would they like you to proceed. In other words, would you like us to do some counseling with a Christian therapist together, as opposed to just going to fix your kid? I think being really careful trying to fix your child and more seek to understand, empathize, and then you can still obviously have your strong convictions about that. But at the end of the day, at least the folks that I have been engaged with and known, they have felt like they don't mind so much if somebody has a strong conviction in the opposite direction from their choices. What they don't like is being manipulated, a target. So I would say it's good for you to be convicted of your perspective, as long as you can still respect and love and understand. We could probably have this conversation about a couple of dozen different topics. But almost every issue.
Yeah, but let's go one more similar, though. What about a child who says they don't think they believe in God anymore, or that they don't believe God is
Did they give
real?
an age?
No.
Okay. Let me just tell you something. Every kid has got to turn down your faith in order to embrace theirs. Okay? So a lot of times, that's first thing. Second thing is, developmentally, even when you're early 20s, you may say what you're thinking at the moment and really believe it at the moment, but you don't really believe it. And you don't even know that. So if somebody says, I don't believe in God, well, there's a video that's been going on around a long time where some kids said, I don't believe in God, and the mom started flipping out and banging pans and finally said, you're not getting a Christmas present. Okay, there's one response.
Probably not a good one.
Yeah, I mean, what's better is tell me more about that. What are you feeling? Why? What are you thinking about? What do you need from us? And really want to encourage you to continue to explore. In other words, normalize it, relax, and their journey is long and winding.
Okay. Let's get into some just quick practical ones.
Okay.
How do you talk to a kid who wants a phone, but you don't think they're ready? And that question usually comes in as smartphone. I think we can stop calling them smartphones.
And it doesn't really start till first grade, so it's luckily it's not a big issue.
I know, yeah.
All right, I actually have a section. If I was doing this for an hour and a half or 2 hours, I have a section on technology. I think the basic bottom line on all technology decisions is know that it's a tool. It's not a have to, it's a get to. And so any decision you make, any conversation, you need to make it a tool. Now, the reason it's not a tool is because we don't treat it as adults as tools. We'll say no cell phones, and then we'll pick it up and check our texts. You need to teach your kids to use technology as a tool, and then therefore have very specific covenant rules that you all abide to together. And then when you feel like your kid gets that idea, and you choose to move into that season, there's no answer. Some families do 6th grade, some do 8th, some do high school or later. But have strict boundaries. Everything you give them that's new, whether it's a new bedtime, a new curfew, a new phone, a car, always have, hey, for the next 3 months, we are going to have kind of this probationary period. We're going to check in every week. And therefore, that gives you the ability to tighten up. Because once you loosen up, it's real hard to go back.
Right. I'll just add something that's helped me. I have a 12-year-old in 6th grade, and so these are real conversations. But having the community you talk about, those friends that who have kids going through the same stuff, and it's like talking about that with other people, gosh, so much better than having to think about that yourself or alone. Okay, this kind of fits with some of that as we talk about technology, but can you talk about balancing giving your adolescent some privacy while also staying in the know, especially with social media?
Yeah, Dee's a therapist, and she's really awesome, but sometimes when they're in high school, they gave us plenty of reason, all 3 of them, to be sneaky. Gentle as doves and as snakes. Sorry, I blew that. What's the text? Come on.
Oh, it's
wise as serpents, but I think the word's not wise. The Greek word's much more fun. In other words, I think we should not promise our kids total confidentiality. That's my opinion. Not everybody agrees with that one. Most parenting people don't. They think it's okay for kids to have secrets. But I think that we need to have the permission to say, if we have a reason to violate your secrecy, you need to build enough trust that you violate the secrecy out of protecting them, because you do need to know sometimes. Now, I would also say, if they've proven trustworthy and you talk about it, then give them the room. If something is not quite right, then you step in. But I wouldn't do it outside a relationship. You got to build that trust so they know that you care enough that you're going to be involved.
Yeah. So what does discipline look like when you still want to allow the sacred space and you're trying to build trust with your child, when you have to discipline them?
When I do Q&As, those are always the ones that come up. Discipline, yes.
Yeah.
Luckily, discipline's all over the Bible. Yes. Unfortunately, the word used for discipline in English is in Greek in the New Testament. Let's just take that. 90% of the time, you see the word discipline in English, like, for example, Hebrews. 90% of the time, it's not really punitive, it's training. My analogy for the discipline is if you're coaching a Pee Wee football team and coaches are allowed on the field, and at really young ages, sometimes, especially early in the season, coaches might be able to stop a play. Say, coach, just give me a minute. And you talk to that defensive back that missed a tackle. And you say, run that play again where you fake the ball and the quarterback runs this way, and this kid totally missed and and then you go, hey, tell you what, we're going to run that play again. And just remember, watch the ball. Don't worry. If they run that way, you just keep your eye on the ball. And so run that play again, and you just watch the ball. That's discipline. That's biblical discipline most of the time, is you're training them without shaming them. Now, there are times when you need to draw boundaries around their behavior or choices and have consequences. But punitive work in both social science and judicial science has shown are never effective to change behavior. Punishment only makes things worse in the long run. It's somehow getting somebody to understand what and why they're doing that hurts others, is outside the bounds of our agreed behavior, and therefore a boundary of a condition, we call it maybe grounding, but do it in a way that's not just punishing them, but actually is having them in conversation. In fact, there was a show, I forgot what it was called, but Patricia on Raymond, the wife on Raymond, that show that was just a few years ago, and they wanted to punish their kid. And instead of sending him away, like ground him, they forced him to stay close to them for a week. And it was hysterical because the kid, that was the worst punishment they could have possibly done. And even when they were fighting once, they made him go outside in the snow and they shut the door, but made him stay right next to the door. So in other words, be creative. You don't want to hurt your kid. You want to help them to learn and to grow.
How would you encourage someone who has to navigate that in a blended family situation where, the children are not...
Is that one of your questions?
It is, yeah. So
I thought you were sneaking me a tough one.
they're sneaking you tough ones.
Blended families, again, depending on your circumstances, at least for a season, the step parent is not the parent. So the first thing you must do is make sure that there's an integrity inside the kid's mind and heart. They still have their parents, and not trying to get the step parent to replace the actual parent. Now there's exceptions to that, but that's first. And until you've negotiated it relationally as a family, it really has to be handled. A step parent's role really has to be handled very, very carefully. When you're not a step-parent situation, the parents have to be absolutely in sync. But a step-parent situation, unless you've done the hard work to make sure all the kids agree and you're all same page, has to be handled by the original parent.
What about parenting a child who is with an unbelieving ex part of the time and then back with you, and so they're hearing two different narratives?
These are so specific. Don't you have any kind of general softballs?
I got a
go
couple
to the
coming up
hotel
for
and
you.
feel good about myself.
We're gonna.
Well, on that one, not just unbelieving, but an ex or a non-custodial parent, and you're sharing custody that has just a different perspective on just about anything. How do you deal with that? All right, aside from the gross, overt, legal stuff, I'm not going to get into that. If everything else is more or less agreed upon, then somehow you need to allow that parent to parent the way that they feel they do it best, unless they're going to harm the child or violate their covenant. And a lot of parents don't like it when that other parent doesn't take them to church. But as long as that other parent will respect the church when they are with the parent that parent takes them to church, in the long run, you do not want to tell a kid that your ex is a horrible person. If they believe that, that's up to them. But our job, because that kid is going to want to have a relationship with both parents over time. So again, it's so specific that it's not fair for me to even go on that
That's
one.
right.
Because you can do damage if you're not careful in any direction on that.
All right, well, let's shift gears and go more to parents of really young children, toddlers.
Easy.
Okay.
Gosh, yay, finally.
First of all, this isn't here, but what encouragement would you give parents who have young children and they've heard all this and maybe are thinking it's a really daunting task ahead?
Oh, it's so much easier and so much more fun when they're little. Because by the way, if you want to do a ministry that's the most fun ministry you could ever have, teach fourth graders. Teach fourth graders, because fourth graders are the most reasonable humans on the planet. In fact, especially boys. Boys, the pinnacle of male emotional maturity is fourth grade. From there, it just goes, straight down the toilet. And because they're so concrete, fourth graders. So play with your kids, have great conversations with your kids, boundary your kids, invite them to think deeper and differently. You heard this Korean girl, she was 6 years old. And she had these incredible thoughts about just keep it slow. You guys can calm down. Well, this is a time to have a lot of fun, but play in these areas. These ought to be the pools you swim in, as opposed to just going skiing in Colorado and that kind of stuff. That's not bad, but use your time together to build a foundation, because then it's much, much easier when they hit junior high and high school.
What do you recommend to parents that want to introduce their young children to the Bible?
Oh, I think you ought to talk about the Bible, read it. Now remember, it's Jesus we worship, and the Bible points to Jesus. Can I say that again? It's Jesus we worship, the Bible points to Jesus, and the Bible is this incredible gift so that we may know the Lord that we worship and we live for. And you tell the stories in these dinners, you tell stories at night, you sing songs together about and don't stop that when they're in junior high and high school. And if they see you reading the Bible and they see your life aligning with that, that is powerful. If they see you reading the Bible and they hear you make a racist comment, it's way worse.
All right. Sorry.
Drop the mic, sorry.
Yeah, it was good. Okay, you talked about discipline earlier. There were some questions about discipline with toddlers. Would you say anything different?
Gosh, you guys. All right, my background is I was a young life leader, so everything's love and joy and embrace. And then I went and got, I started teaching seminary, and they made me get a doctorate, a PhD in human development, as it turned out, and leadership. Those things don't usually fit together. And in human development, and so I became a social scientist and a practical theologian at Fuller. Well, I'm speaking from that perspective. There is no evidence that hitting your child with an object or your hand is ever going to strengthen their sense of self. It will always cause them to fear you at a deep level in the psyche. All the research points to that. When we go to Proverbs and we read, spare the rod, spoil the child, you need to understand what a biblical rod is. A shepherd didn't take the rod and just smack a sheep. Shepherd used the rod to help sheep stay together, to protect them. That's really a different picture. So how you deal with a toddler or any age, you deal with where they are developmentally by making sense to them developmentally so they can understand within the context of how old they are. But then you hold the cards and do what is best for that child. One child may need 10 minutes to simply be alone and think. Another child may need 2 minutes of having to sit in a corner and not face anybody. And your kids, you will do different things. Our oldest child, we got these really thick chains with big locks. No, I'm just kidding. But sometimes we wish we had. Oh.
All right, this is about your early content. Why is the gap between puberty and adulthood getting bigger and bigger? And you said there's a lot of reasons, but
bottom line, my thesis is, and it's more in a book called Her2, Inside the World of Today's Teenagers. I did a large ethnographic study of high school kids, and I was on a campus for 8 months as a substitute teacher, and then did a national study. And out of that, what's the question again? Sorry, can you tell I'm in California time?
I've deleted that question. What did I just ask? I'm sorry. Oh, yeah.
Oh, why is that lesson linked to you?
Sorry.
Thank you.
I'm moving on to the
next
next
this
one.
happens when you get up really early in California and you get to come to Texas, because I'm so excited. Yeehaw. Okay. What's happened is the support for kids allowed them to swim in a sea of adult contact for centuries in every culture. The more we optioned out or resourced out, outsourced, I guess is the word you used. See, a coach of volleyball, no, let's take a high school teacher 40 years ago. High school teacher 40 years ago, 26 years old, and girls on the JV volleyball team would come to her and say, we got a game today, will you come? 40 years ago. Well, not only would she would come and stay for the whole game, all 3 games. And in those days, I don't know if you remember volleyball, but in those days, you didn't get a point unless you served. Think about JV girls volleyball 30, 40 years ago. Those games would take 3 days. Serve net, rotate, okay, go, serve. And the teacher would go, I am teaching because I want to go watch those girls. This is so great. And then they come in the stands and we talk for an hour. Now, if kids asked the teacher, that would be very rare, but if a teacher would show up, they'd show up, but they'd be on their phone. They'd be there for half an hour, maybe 20 minutes. And they'd wave, make sure they were seen. That's what's happened, is there are less people that are simply around kids so they know what it means to be an adult without having to perform. There are 3 aspects to what it means to grow up today: performance, conformity, and image. And all 3 of those fall into the rubric of, I have to present myself so somebody will love me, so somebody will find me worthy. And what that's done is created a false self, which extends adolescence. They live out of a false self because they're always playing to the crowd, to the parents, to the teacher, to the coach. And that's why I call them abandoned. It's so hard for somebody to find themselves when there's nobody that said, I love you, quit trying so hard. There's more to that. Okay.
Right. Okay, how do you help an older teen or a young adult open up?
or even, this would apply for younger kids too, but you're ready to listen as a parent. You're ready to create that safe space, and you just, how do you draw those words out of them?
Well, I could just see some of you guys going home and holding up your book going, okay, done, I got the book. And your kid going, did you go to another one of those parent conferences? I told you not to ever go to another parent conference, okay? You can't, it doesn't work that way. You can't just go and say, okay, kid, I'm ready to open up. I'm ready, I'm an open book, come on. Share. No chance. Baby steps. Slowly build the trust and work up to it. You need to have a mindset of that and change slightly your behavior and your spirit and attitude as you engage with your kids. And over time, they'll open up a little tiny bit more to you. But it really is a lifetime of changing your relationship with them.
All right, will you speak to some of the specific ways you think COVID is affecting?
Yeah, I just did an article for the American Association of Christian Counselors on this, and then talked to the Young Life staff. All the Young Life staff are new about this. They are certainly going to be less trusting of others because they were not very trusting going into it. This is teenagers and young adults. They are certainly going to rely on a much smaller pool of friends than they did before because they haven't had the social interaction where you learn the rules and the boundaries and the levels of friendship. That's really important developmentally. And so what's going to happen is kids come back is they're not just going to dive into, ooh, let's all do something with 30 people. Some will, or just over it, and they're great. But there's going to be a lot more kids that are going to be tentative as they engage. And I think there's going to be a lot more performance anxiety than we've had before because it's taken a toll on them not being able to be in school, do sports, do things that give them some sense of accomplishment. And we got to have a whole network of adults that are really tuned in to kids just needing to be cared for and listened to and encouraged and empowered aside from their performance because they got less resources than ever before because of COVID. These are just some of the thoughts.
I'm going to give you a couple of rapid fire ones. Do you have any resources you'd recommend for a parent of a child who is very scientific in questioning faith?
Actually, there's been a lot of good work done with Yale. I did it early on, but some other people, a guy named Andrew Root is a professor at Luther Seminary, has written a book on youth ministry and science. I don't know the exact title, but Yale, their Center for Youth Development or something like that, they did a whole thing with a Lilly grant where they studied science and young people and faith. So you can look at Yale Divinity School, their youth ministry stuff. They got a whole resource library there.
Cool. We also did a series, Faith and Science, a couple of years ago that was a teaching series you can find in our sermon archives. And I would say continue to push your kids to see the harmony between science and faith. It's beautiful. Biologos.org is another great resource for that. Next one, do you have any specific books or resources you recommend for preteens to read on their own or as a family?
You know, I get asked that a lot. I don't necessarily, but I'm a little jaded by some of the preteen and children's literature. By far what they need is they need adults that'll sit and talk to them and listen to them. And yes, reading's good if your kid's a reader, but you read the book first before you hand them a book. Once they get into high school and determine what they kind of are interested in, you can find books that lift up Christ and not Christianity. Mm-hmm. That really talk, the apologetics of following Jesus is really a key, central, no matter what you read.
We could keep going, but our time is about up. This is the last one. You talked about training our kids in Jesus and how them watching us follow Jesus makes the biggest difference. What do you say to all of us? A room full of people who, some are new to following Jesus and some have been doing it a while, but when you said that, felt it in our stomach. Like, oof, you guys probably know what I'm talking about. Or you feel that. What do you say?
And frankly, some of you, that you're not even settled in that yourself, which is okay. I mean, it's better if you are settled in that, but wherever you are on the faith journey, your kid wants to know in a way that doesn't disrupt their journey. You don't just intentionally plant doubt in your kid's mind. They're going to doubt for themselves, fine. But the more real you are, especially about faith, the more authentic you let faith interact with your attitudes and behavior and language, that's going to have a massive impact on your kid's life. Because they've looked around and seen models of Christians that have not done a great job of that one, at least some people say. So don't worry so much. Your kid needs you to be you. And if you have any semblance of faith, access that. Explore that. By the way, God wants you to dance too, okay? This should be a greatest joy of your life and not a burden and not a fear. Oh, lastly, if you're a parent, you are the best possible parent your kid could have because God made you that kid's parent. And therefore, go with that kind of confidence that the Lord will equip you to love your child in his name.
All right, here's how I think we should close. If we'll just all take a moment and pray for our kids. I'm going to give you a moment. And then, Chap, would you pray for us
I would
as
love
parents
to.
and grandparents?
Yeah.
All right.
Father, the faces and the names that are being lifted up to you right now, you know them. You know every contour. You know every line. You know every nuance of color in their eyes. And in your great love, each one of these children that we're lifting up and praying for, Lord, you care so deeply for them. And so now I pray for the parents, the teachers, the youth workers, the grandparents, the friends, that you are calling to love your children well. I pray for each one to have a soft and sensitive heart to you, to be broken of rigid conviction that doesn't come from you, to be tender and kind, to respond well versus react. And even when we fail, Lord, that we have the ability to seek forgiveness and to move forward. Grow all of these folks to the point that you can truly use them to love your kids. We pray for the children of this congregation. All the kids in this geographic area, all over Texas, all over the U.S., all around the world, that your children would know you and that all followers of you would be employed in the task of lifting up these kids so that you will change the world through these kids. We thank you for your power and your mercy and your grace. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Amen.